So if you're in a revenue facing role at a SaaS company, you're an account executive, implementation specialist, sales engineer, and you've ever been in a deal where the prospect security team gets involved and things just sort of stopped, right? Things just sort of slowed down. I made this presentation for you guys so that you can understand a little bit about some of the mechanisms that can help actually accelerate that process so that you can meet your quarterly objectives. One of the things that I constantly see happening is that sales teams get a SOC2 request, or they get a security due diligence questionnaire. They forward it to engineering, they forward it to security, they forward it to legal, and then they basically just have to wait, right? It just goes kind of into a black box. The deal sort of slows down. The security team is kind of slow to respond. And the reason for this is because security teams at high growth organizations don't typically have a dedicated customer trust function. So the attentiveness to prospect security due diligence requests, it typically gets put on the back burner, and the sales team is usually not really equipped to navigate the situation in a way that keeps the deal from stalling. So a SOC2 report is one of the antidotes that can help resolve a good portion of the stagnation that presents itself during this phase of the sales cycle. And by the end of this, you're going to understand what a SOC2 report actually is, what your SOC2 report actually says, what the prospect is actually doing with your SOC report on their end, and how to use it as a sales asset instead of just hoping and praying that it doesn't kill the deal. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into this presentation. One quick thing before I get into the content, I want to make sure that you're in the right place. This conversation is going to be for account executives, implementation specialists, network leads, or anyone who's in a revenue facing role who is selling cloud SaaS into enterprise accounts. Okay, so if you're the person who has to be on the call when the prospect security team starts asking some of these questions, this is going to be the presentation for you. If you're a founder who's watching this because your sales team keeps getting stuck in security reviews, this will also be useful to you. But if you're a purely technical security practitioner and you're looking for like deep compliance content, this is probably not going to be up your alley. I'll have other videos on my channel that are more geared towards those teams and teams that are supporting some of the processes that I'm talking about in this presentation. But you can feel free to kind of stick around if you want to understand more about what's happening on the business side. But if you're in sales, you're in customer success, you're in a revenue sort of role, something that you need to understand is that security questionnaires, security reviews, they are not going to go away. Okay. They're actually getting more rigorous because of the influx of AI that are in a lot of these products that your companies are developing. So the reps that understand this stuff are going to be the ones who are better equipped to sort of control the deal flow, accelerate the deal, as it sort of travels through this phase of the procurement process. Here is a quick agenda of some of the things that we're going to go over. First, we're going to go over what a SOC 2 report actually is, right? Why is it important? Why it exists? What it's actually saying about your organization's security posture. The second thing that we're going to go over is the difference between a SOC 2 type 1 report versus a SOC 2 type 2 report. And we're going to talk about why that distinction matters, because if you're going to hand your prospect the wrong report at the wrong stage of the deal without understanding what you're actually sharing with them, this is going to contribute to some of that back and forth that actually slows the deal down. The third thing that we're going to talk about is reporting periods and bridge letters. The thing that you have to understand about SOC 2 reports is that they have an expiration date. And this is something that when I'm working with sales teams, they say, can't we just send over the SOC 2 report? But the latest SOC 2 report that you have is from 2024, right? So, I'm going to show you guys what this looks like, what you can do to proactively handle the natural objection that will occur when you send an outdated SOC 2 report. And again, all of these methods that I'm going to share with you are intended for you to shorten this phase of the procurement process so that you can meet your quarterly objectives and just so that you can push the deal through that in a way that's going to be more seamless. And when you're able to push the deal through in a way that's more seamless, it's going to continue to just create that trust that you're trying to establish and that you've probably been working with the champion to establish over the course of however many months. The fourth topic that we're going to cover is probably one of the most important sections because it covers what's actually happening on the prospect side when they ask for your report. So we're going to talk a little bit about the profile of the individual who's going to be reviewing your report. What are the sort of things that they're actually looking for inside of your report? What are the things that they might flag and sort of how you can be prepared when they flag the things that they might find in your report. Lastly, we're going to cover exceptions, management responses, and remediation plans. This is the part that most sales reps completely avoid, or they just outsource it to the security and engineering team. And I think that that's valid to outsource these sort of things because to your internal security team, because they're the people who are actually dealing with these exceptions and management responses and remediation plans. But having this context is going to equip you to be more proactive when the engagement gets to this phase. Okay, so we're going to demystify it because if you know how to handle an exception conversation, you can take the initiative to accelerate the procurement process and meet those quarterly objectives. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so just so you understand a little bit about my perspective, I've been on both sides of this transaction for the past 10 years. I've been the person at a company evaluating vendors, reviewing SOC2 reports, deciding whether a vendor's security posture was acceptable before we let them touch our data or integrate with our environment. And I've also been the internal practitioner who had to prepare the SOC2, respond to the security questionnaires, work with the sales teams and educate sales teams on, why the security questionnaire is taking so long to answer. I've built customer trust programs from the ground up. I've been in organizations that completely didn't even have a trust center, that didn't have a program around this aspect of the sales cycle. And I've built that program from the ground up, educating the sales team, pulling in subject matter experts from their security teams to be able to make this process a lot more cohesive and get those deals across the line a lot faster. I've been the person explaining the exceptions to leadership. I've been the person who's navigating the audit. And now I work with high growth organizations to unlock that revenue that's stuck in the security procurement cycle. So that is the specific problem that I solve for high growth organizations, especially in regulated industries. So everything that I'm going to be teaching you in this video, it's not coming from theory. It's not coming from something that I read in a book. This is coming from work that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis in real organizations on both sides of the table. So I just wanted to let you guys know that that is sort of the lens that I'm going to be bringing to this discussion. Get a little bit of water. Got the electrolytes in the water today. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the fundamentals, right? What is a SOC2 report? Some of you guys might know already, but I want to make sure that I cover this part just so that we can kind of like set the basis at square one here. So a SOC2 report is a third-party attestation of compliance. And basically, this attestation of compliance is measured against a set of security standards that are called the Trust Services Criteria. You can look this up at aicpa.org. So basically, it's an independent auditing firm that comes into your organization. They review your controls, they review your processes, they review your evidence, and then they basically produce a report that says whether your security program holds up against these standards or not, the trust services criteria. The key word to understand for the SOC2 report and why it's important is the term independence. So, and what I mean by that is it's not just your organization saying that we take security seriously. It's an auditor saying that we've reviewed this organization's security controls and here's what we found. This is independent proof that your customers can trust you with their data. So a SOC 2 report is essentially a trust document that exists because your prospects can't just take your word for it. Some of you have probably also heard of an ISO 27001 certificate. They're both kind of in the same realm. The ISO 27001 certificate has a different list of controls, even though some of the controls do overlap, but they're sort of the same. They're meant to produce that same or similar assurance. Okay. So this is important because especially at the enterprise scale where the consequence of a breach or a compliance failure is enormous, right? Especially in regulated industries, these customers that you're trying to sell into, they can't just take your word on like we do a good job at security. So when a prospect asks for your SOC 2 report, they're not intentionally trying to slow down the deal. They're not intentionally just trying to grill you. They typically have an obligation on their side where they need proof about your security posture, and your SOC 2 report is essentially what provides that proof to your prospect. Oh, excuse me. All right. So when an enterprise prospect asks you for your SOC 2 report, again, this is not going to be a preference. Okay. It's not them just trying to be difficult. It's usually a compliance requirement that someone in their organization is mandated to fulfill before they can sign a contract with you, especially again, and I'm trying to harp on this point, but this is especially when you're selling into regulated industries like healthcare, finance, or government. Before they sign your contract, someone at their organization has been tasked with essentially verifying that you can be trusted with their data. So if your security narrative isn't clean and credible on paper, they're not going to be able to sign off on the deal. It doesn't matter how good your product is. It doesn't matter how strong the champion relationship is. This doesn't move without this piece. Okay. The deal doesn't move forward without this piece. Again, especially when you're selling into enterprise, highly regulated industries. So let's talk a little bit about what's actually happening on the prospect side from a security due diligence perspective. So typically speaking, there's going to be a security team who's just working through a checklist. Okay. It's literally a checklist. Like they literally have a spreadsheet that they're working from. Okay. And it literally says, reach out to the vendor. If the vendor has a SOC 2 report, or if the vendor has a trust center, go to their trust center, download the SOC 2 report, upload it to this SharePoint site, review the SOC 2 report for this, and this, upload the dates to the SOC 2 report on this spreadsheet. And then they basically produce an internal report that gives the justification for them to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to whether your security posture is good enough for them to basically give the thumbs up for this deal to basically move forward. Okay. So they have a standardized vendor assessment process, and your SOC 2 report is typically just going to be one of the items on that checklist. And if they can't check it off and come to the determination that it meets their standards, that's when a lot of the back and forth happens. That's when a lot of the deal stall happens, right? That friction point is what a lot of you are facing right now. So there's a procurement team that's not going to release a purchase order until security, right? Until their internal security team signs off. So at this stage of the deal cycle, the quality of your security story on paper is going to determine whether the deal moves forward or not. So your documentation, your reports, how clean your reports are, how current your reports are, and how well your organization can actually speak to what's in your report. That's the kind of game, that's sort of the game that's actually being played at this phase of the deal cycle. Not all SOC 2 reports are created equal. So this is a distinction that's important because you're going to get caught flat-footed if you don't understand the difference between a SOC 2 Type 1 report and a SOC 2 Type 2 report. A SOC 2 Type 1 report is a snapshot in time. So this is basically when an auditor is going to come in, they're going to look at your controls on a specific day, and they're going to say these controls existed on this day. So it looks at your security program and it says you've built a security program, but it doesn't necessarily prove that that security program operated consistently over a period of time at a high level. A SOC 2 report it covers a period of time. So this period of time is typically 3 to 12 months. And this is basically an auditor confirming that your controls weren't just in place, but that they operated consistently over a period of time. And this sort of like time-bound consistency, this is a fundamentally different level of assurance than the type of assurance that the SOC2 Type 1 report provides. So for enterprise buyers, the SOC2 Type 2 report is typically going to be the gold standard. Although most security teams are going to be able to accept a SOC2 Type 1 report as a starting point, they're going to ask you when you're going to have your SOC2 Type 2 report. They're going to ask you if you're engaged with an auditor, and they're going to typically want to see an official engagement letter that says, like from the auditor, that says, yes, we're engaged with your company. This is the time frame that we're planning on testing these controls. This is the scope of applications that we're going to be reviewing, right? So these are the sorts of things that you're going to want to have prepared if all you have to show for is a SOC2 Type 1 report, and if your organization is going after that SOC2 Type 2 report. And again, I'm just giving you some of this context. I know that none of this stuff is really like in your direct domain of expertise, but having this context when you're approaching these conversations with your prospects, it's going to be important for you to have, because then you don't have to be so reliant on your security team who has their own priorities and their own responsibilities. You're not going to have to be so reliant on them to get back to you. Okay. So if you hand a SOC2 Type 1 over to an enterprise security reviewer, you should expect a follow-up email. Okay. And knowing which one you have and what it means is just another point of leverage for you. If your company has a SOC2 Type 1 and you're selling into the enterprise, it's best to be proactive about that conversation. All right. Another thing that you should know about your SOC2 report, whether it's a SOC2 Type 1 or a SOC2 Type 2, is that they have an expiration date, specifically the SOC2 Type 2, right? We're talking about that window of time. So a SOC2 Type 2 does cover a defined window. For instance, a report can cover the time frame from January through December. Once that report is issued, it immediately starts aging. So enterprise security teams know this, and they're going to look at the reporting period and they're going to ask you what has changed since that window has expired or closed. If your report expired 6 months ago and you're in the deal today, the prospect security team is going to flag that, and they're going to want to know whether the controls in that report still accurately represent your security posture right now. Okay. This is where a bridge letter comes in. So a bridge letter is issued by your organization, not the auditor. And it's basically a letter that says what has materially changed since the last SOC2 report. So this is not independent assurance. It's not a new audit, but it's kind of like a credible good faith update that says, here's where we are today relative to what was in that report. So if your SOC2 report is close to expiring or already expired, you as the sales lead, you're going to want to know where your bridge letter is if your organization has one. You're going to want to know who owns it, and you're going to want to be ready to provide it when the prospect asks for it, or you're just going to be able to proactively send it to the prospect if you know that your SOC2 report is outdated. So sometimes your SOC2 report is going to have what are called exceptions. So when an auditor reviews your security controls over the reporting period, sometimes they're going to find a control that didn't operate as intended, right? Maybe an access review wasn't completed in time. Maybe a security training deadline got missed. Maybe a patch wasn't applied within the required SLA window. But basically when that happens, the auditor is going to flag it, and they're going to list it inside of the SOC2 report as an exception. Now, the thing about exceptions is they're not an automatic deal killer. Okay. So enterprise security teams understand that not every security program is perfect. No security program is perfect. So they're not looking for a perfect report. They're looking for how your organization responds to things that go wrong. The things that does kill the deal is when a prospect finds an exception in your report and the prospect brings it up on a call, and the person on your side of the call has no idea what they're talking about, right? That silence is what's going to cost you the deal, not the actual exception itself. Okay. The signal that your team doesn't actually know your own security documentation is what's going to cost you that deal. So you should know the basics of your report. You should know what's in your report. You should know if there are exceptions in your report, what those exceptions are, and kind of what the story is around them. Okay. That's the work that you need to do before this conversation happens, not during it, so that you just get blindsided by this. Then you have to go back to security. You have to understand what the exceptions are. You have to understand if there are remediation plans or management responses, which is what we're going to talk about next, actually. Right? If there are any things that are happening to mitigate the risks that have been identified through these exceptions, right? And that's adding, more days, sometimes even more weeks to this procurement process, right? So, like we were saying before, when there's an exception in the SOC 2 report, your organization typically has the ability to respond directly inside the SOC 2 report. And these responses are called management responses. And when they're done well, they can actually become a strong selling point. So a strong management response acknowledges the finding directly. It basically says, we're aware of this. It also explains what caused the finding in the first place, right? This shows that your organization actually understands your own processes well enough to diagnose what went wrong. And third, it closes the loop with accountability. So here's what we did. Here's what we're going to fix it. And here's the timeline, and here's the owner, right? That structure is a mature security organization signal. Okay, so one of the things that I've actually seen in practice when I've read SOC 2 reports with a thoughtful management response is that I'm actually more impressed by something like that than when I read a completely clean SOC 2 report with no exceptions at all, because no exceptions can kind of mean a lot of things, right? Including that the audit wasn't done thoroughly. So a clear exception with a strong response says that your organization takes security seriously enough to own its gaps and fix them in a way that is proactive. So when a security exception or when an exception in your SOC 2 report is significant, it should get a formal remediation plan with documented timelines. Okay, it should have documented timelines. It should have dedicated owners and documented steps that are usually known as what are called action plans. The moment that you or your team tries to downplay or sidestep the exception conversation, you've created a trust problem at the worst possible moment. Okay, so like if there's exceptions in your report and no one in your organization can speak to the exceptions in your report, and you kind of try to downplay it or you kind of try to push it to the side, from the security practitioner perspective, this is what's going to raise the red flags. This is when I'm going to start asking questions like, hey, I want to get on a call with your chief information security officer. This is what I'm going to say. Hey, I want to send you guys over a security questionnaire so that we can get more assurance. This is what I'm going to say. Do you guys have any pen test reports? Can I get on a meeting with your security team? And again, these are all things that just make this part of the procurement process take a lot longer. The right move is to get ahead of this by understanding what the plan is, understanding who owns it, understanding what the timeline is, and you or your trust director, if you have one, should walk the prospect through it directly and confidently by letting them know what was found, right? The exception, what's being done to fix it, and what the current status of this exception is, especially for exceptions that are significant. A well-documented remediation plan, and when it's delivered proactively, again, this signals accountability and structure within your organization, which is a sort of like subcomponent to establishing that overall trust, right? Those are exactly the things that an enterprise buyer is trying to assess when they're deciding whether they're going to trust you with their data or not. And in some cases, you can actually share the remediation plan directly with the prospect. I've seen that move or accelerate deals because it removes a lot of that uncertainty that the prospect has, right? They know exactly what they're getting and they know that your security team is on top of it. And the confidence in that conversation around your exceptions can be used as a competitive advantage that a lot of other vendors don't have. All right, so let's start wrapping this up. Here is what I want you to take away from all this. A SOC 2 report is not just a document that you can hand over and just hope for the best. It's a conversation starter that makes or that marks the beginning of the security due diligence process that your prospect is going to have, whether you're ready for it or not. The sales professional who takes the time to understand what's in that report, what type of report it is, what period the report covers, whether there's exceptions in the report or not, what the management responses say, right? These are the people who can actually control that conversation instead of getting ambushed by that conversation. You don't need to be a security expert to do any of this. All you need to do is read your own SOC 2 report, or you can even put it into your AI tool that you're using at your organization and ask it to just break it down for you, based off of the context of everything that I've explained to you already in this conversation. So you just need to really understand the basics and being prepared to speak to what's in this report, and being able to speak to this to the prospect. It brings up that tactical advantage that you always want, right? That edge that you always want when you're having those conversations with your prospects, right? That's the difference between a deal that moves forward and the deal that dies quietly while it's in that security review stage. Last thing quickly. So if you're at a high growth company and this is a pattern that you keep running into, this is probably not going to be a one-off problem. This is a systemic problem and a programmatic problem. Okay. With the right type of program management, the right documentation, and the right way of positioning your security narrative to enterprise buyers, you can 100% accelerate this part of the deal cycle. Right? You can lose that dependency of having to rely on your super busy security team who's trying to protect your organization from, cyber attacks. You can close that dependency gap and you can take ownership of certain aspects of this part of the process just through simple education or just outsourcing this function to an organization like mine, right? This is exactly the type of work that we do at Trust House. If this is something that you want to talk about, the link is in my description. And if you found this useful, share it with someone on your sales team, and I will see you in the next video.